Well, tonight I'm hoping to be a little bit informal. I'll take some questions as I go through. If there's something that perks your interest or something that maybe isn't quite explained, of course I won't be able to take probably more than too many questions from one individual, but I want to try and get through as many of these pictures and things as I can. Some of the pictures won't look as, how can I put it? Some pictures will not tell a huge story, but the significance of the location is kind of what I'm going for tonight as I take a look at this together. So the places we're going to look at tonight are not necessarily in the order I saw them, but we're just going to be kind of walking through them alphabetically tonight as some of the different sites that we went through. And I'm sure as we kind of walk through things, there'll be some questions that are on your mind. And hopefully we'll get a few things answered tonight and some maybe new ideas of things that we're going to look at. So we're going to start tonight. If you've got a Bible, we're going to go to Genesis chapter 28. Genesis chapter 28 is where we're going to start tonight. The first picture that I'm going to pull up here in just... Oh, go ahead. You can put it up there. That's great. Now, I'm not sure... All right. Noah, I may need you back on the camera tonight, okay? Just because I'm going to have to step over here a little bit to look at things. All right? Well, you were back on there, right? Yeah, go back quickly, okay? I'm just going to try and move that camera just a little bit, just in case people are watching that way tonight. Okay. So Genesis chapter 28 and verse 11. Okay, this is the foundations of a palace that at one point, or a king's house. I'm trying to remember the name of the king right now, and I won't be able to remember all the details that we looked at. It was like information overload, okay? But Genesis chapter 28, verse number 11, it says, "And he lighted upon a certain place and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took the stones of that place and put them for his pillows, and laid down in the place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God descending or ascending and descending upon it." And as you go down further on this text, you'll see in verse 19, he called the name of that place Bethel, for the name of it city was called Luz at the first. Now this is a hill right here, kind of off to the right, is just overlooking this location of where the city of Bethel was. And so of course it's a significant site that you come back to many times in the Bible, and this would have been just kind of off to the right. And of course up here on this delta, this higher section where we were, is kind of the foundations left over from one of these locations. Now, one of the things I just wanted you to kind of notice is when you read in the Bible and it talks about rocks for a pillow, they are in ample supply, okay? There are lots. I mean, it is such a rocky landscape in so many different areas. So right now we would be in kind of the location of when you're talking of the Bible as far as Samaria, kind of the northern part there of Israel, but kind of in this region. Not quite up to the furthest north area in Israel we're looking at, but this is just kind of right in this location of where Bethel is. So on the right there is the man that was our guide for the week. His name was Moshe, all right, or Moses we would say, all right. I don't even think I'm pronouncing that right, but he was actually, he's a Jew, but a Christian, a believer. And so he was really nice to have him, as he made so many great connections to the Bible, both Old Testament and New Testament for us, but he did a fantastic job, and we really enjoyed it. But that's at this location. So you can kind of see, as a lot of the landscape of Israel is, it's a combination of mountains and valleys almost everywhere, especially in this region until you get sometimes further south into some of what we'd call the Judean wilderness, all right, in some of those areas, okay? But this is right next to where Bethel is. Now, just on the side here, we walked down some of that, but then eventually hit kind of the border of where would be the West Bank. And then, so some of those areas you can't all get into, at least by foot. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and we'll just try and work through these things as we go. Does anyone have any questions about that first one, about Bethel? All right. So this, all right, this is in Capernaum. So let's go ahead. We'll find our Bible into a couple different places here in Capernaum. And the Bible talks a lot about Capernaum. Let's go to Matthew chapter 4 and verse 12. Okay, so Capernaum, this is some pictures from it, but Capernaum was kind of the home base of Jesus Christ while he was in his Galilean ministry. All right, a lot of times you'll see in the New Testament where the Bible talks about Jesus going to Galilee. Lillian, do you remember what this one is? I think you probably would have saw this one while you were there. Okay, all right. So this is part of Capernaum. So this house, all right, because of some archaeological things that are there. Hi, come on in. All right, because of some archaeological things that are there, this is believed to be Peter's house, all right, from Capernaum. That inner foundation of one of the rooms of his house that was left. And one thing you got to kind of prepare yourself for a little bit when you go to Israel is that there's a lot of things that have been purchased by Catholicism or from the Catholic Church, and they have made things like this over top of them. Now, the Catholics in Israel is a little bit of a double-edged sword, okay? Because on one hand, if it wasn't for the Catholics purchasing some of these sites, they would be owned by someone else and not very well taken care of. All right, so, but at the same time, when sometimes you go, you will see sometimes a Catholic presence. And of course, this being believed to be Peter's house, there's actually basically a church that's built over it, but not touching it. All right, so you can actually go and look down into what they believe Peter's house used to be. And this is kind of interesting, at least it was to me. It was very common after a Jewish rabbi, which is, of course, who first of all Jesus Christ was considered to be by some of his contemporaries. It was a very common practice that after a Jewish rabbi died to go back to his place of residence and continue the teachings that he had. So this was something as far as Capernaum being Christ's home base. There's a lot going on there through that time. Did we go to Matthew chapter 4? All right, verse 12. I don't know if I read it or not. But it says, now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. All right, and leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the sea coast in the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali. All right, so Nazareth would have been the place where Jesus lived before this, and it seems that he left that kind of as his own base, and from this point on, Capernaum seems to be kind of the home base of Christ through his ministry. Now, I don't have a map up here right now, but sometimes when we hear Galilee, all right, we get a little bit confused with the Sea of Galilee, all right? Sea of Galilee, the region of Galilee a lot of times was kind of off to the left of the Sea of Galilee. So if you're ever looking at a map of Israel, that's kind of the region of Galilee is, you know, just touching the Sea of Galilee, but then off to the left. Okay, so we'll look at some other things in here as we look at it. Let's go to the next picture if we can. This is a synagogue that was built over top of the ruins of the synagogue from Jesus Christ's time. So this was really neat because you could actually go and look on the side of the building, and the foundation stones was actually from this synagogue that we're looking at here in Capernaum, which is pretty incredible to realize and to consider that when you go to John chapter 6, you want to flip over there fast enough, John chapter 6. Now, you might remember just a couple weeks ago, I preached a message right before I left, or one of the weeks before I left, actually probably a few weeks ago. I can't even keep track of when I preach all these messages, right? But we were talking about the fact that Jesus Christ was trying to teach about the importance of being satisfied, not from physical nourishment, but spiritual nourishment, and to seek God with the same intensity that we would seek after physical things here in John chapter 6. All right, John chapter 6, I'm flipping over there to catch up with you. John chapter 6 and verse 59. Let's back up a couple verses to verse 57. And the living Father has sent me, and I live by the Father, and he that eateth me, even he shall live by me. This is that bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers eat manna and are dead. He that eateth of this bread shall live forever. These things said he in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. All right, so it's pretty amazing to be able, I'm not sure if I put the picture in there. Maybe we'll just go to the next one and see if the picture's in there. There's me standing inside the synagogue representing Steel City Baptist Church. I've even got my t-shirt on. All right, but this is the synagogue. This is also the synagogue, the location of it, where Jesus Christ would have read that passage from Isaiah when he read through and then said, "This day is the scripture fulfilled in your ears," and closed the Bible. That passage from Isaiah would have been read at this synagogue. So This stone is called the Zebedee Stone, and it's pretty interesting because it has the name Zebedee carved into it, which of course was the dad of a couple of the disciples, and so this was kind of their home base, but this stone is still left over. And that's one thing that's really neat as you visit Israel. There's so many different things that confirm the Bible over and over again. And one of the things we saw when we were in Jerusalem was a mark, like a seal, from one of the scribes from the time of David, which I mean is rolling back a few years. But still with the same name on the seal that's recorded in the Bible, way back at that point in history. But yeah, this is the Zebedee Stone, and so it's sitting there. You can walk right up to it, but has the name Zebedee inscribed on it from that location. So these are the foundation stones I'm talking about, okay? So the white stones on the top that are there on top of that was built, I think it says right on here, late 4th century is when those white stones were put on top. So it seems like through certain time periods in history, depending on who basically had control of Israel, that sometimes people would come back. I'm pretty sure this was, I'm not a history buff, but I will tell you this, visiting Israel made me realize understanding history really helps you understand some of these aspects of the Bible. But my memory is this is kind of from the Byzantine time period, but they came back, the Byzantine, and built quite a few synagogues, places of worship on top of some of these, what they consider to be sacred sites. But those black stones you see underneath, all right, at the bottom, those are from the foundation of the synagogue of Jesus Christ's time, which is pretty incredible to look at the same stones and, of course, realize that would have been the stones, the stone floor of the synagogue that Jesus Christ taught those things in Capernaum. Okay? We can go to the next picture. This is inside still this synagogue that was built on top at about 400 AD, and some of the stones that are in there and still there today. Oh, this is a neat one. Okay, we're just going to keep going. This is Caesarea Philippi. All right, so we're going to flip over to Matthew 16 and verse 13. Anyone have any questions yet? Any other questions? Yes, Tracy.
Did you ever just take off your shoes and just be like, I don't know, feel like your feet this loose?
I did touch a few stones along the way. It's kind of incredible to think, the blast from the past that you're kind of experiencing and having a part in. There was a few places that I think my favorite place of all that we visited, and if we can get through all these pictures, I'll get there, was actually, one of them was Shiloh. And Shiloh is where the tabernacle was for 369 years. And so they have it down, pretty definite where that tabernacle would have sat. And so it was a pretty incredible thought to walk there and realize, this is where the location of the Holy of Holies was at one point. And I just really didn't. I just, I was like, I don't know if I want to go there, And although the tabernacle's not there anymore, it wouldn't be the same. There was a little bit of a fearful, respectful moment of realizing that, it's pretty solid confidence. And if I can get there to that picture as to why that was there. Now, this is neat, okay? Now, this is the location of Caesarea Philippi. And we're here in Matthew 16 and verse 13, okay? And we're going to go there and try and quickly look because, the neat thing about some of the geography of the Bible is when the Bible puts places often in Scripture, it's neat that sometimes those specific places do tell a story that help you understand what is happening in a Bible passage, all right? So Matthew 16 and verse 13, it says, when Jesus came to the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And so this comment, this question, of course, that is asked. Look at verse 18. Okay, when Peter makes what we call the great confession of who Jesus Christ is, we know this phrase, and he said and I say unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. All right, the backdrop of the city of Caesarea Philippi, all right, is this mountain. Okay, now what's happening right here is, as like in several other areas in Israel, there are springs that are coming out of the mountain. And it's an interesting country in the fact that it's not like Canada in the fact that there's natural water resources everywhere. But you have areas that are quite barren, and then you have areas that have springs. And so a lot of life is built, obviously, around those springs, and a lot of cities are sometimes built around springs. All right, so Caesarea Philippi was a Roman city that was built around this spring, and it was a place of a lot of pagan worship, all right? A lot of idolatrous worship. There was a temple right there on that rock face, and some of the inscriptions or the carvings in the mountain are still there. You can kind of see some of the hollowed out areas where idols and things would have sat. But this was a place of worship to an idol, and I'm not going to get the name right. It was like Panyas, all right? But it had the face of a man, body of a goat, kind of a crazy looking, ugly thing that was scary looking, all right? So when Jesus Christ would have been teaching this lesson to his disciples, they would have been seeing elevated above the city this temple, all right, to this idolatrous god, all right? But what's interesting as well is that rock face you can see that's kind of deep in there was believed by the people that worship there, believed to be gates into hell, all right, gates into Hades. And they believed that there was some way of like basically being transported, you know, through that area. So they called that location that is dark in there the gates of hell. All right, so imagine Jesus Christ teaching this concept to the disciples there at Caesarea Philippi and having there, yes, the gates of hell as what they thought it was. All right, this place of idolatrous worship, this huge rock face, all right? Upon this rock I will build my church. I mean, everything geographically is illustrating the concept that Christ is trying to teach. And even when they say the gates of hell, it's like all the idolatrous worship of Rome, everything that everyone thinks is so strong is not going to stand against the church that I'm going to build. And it's interesting sometimes, especially when you read through different passages, that the geography of the place does tell the story of what Christ is trying to teach. And this was an interesting one, I really thought, as we were there at Caesarea Philippi in the ruins of the city. You can see some of the water there kind of at the foot of the picture. That is some of the spring and some of the location of water that's coming there through that location. Let's go to the next one if we can. All right. This is the city, the ancient city of Dan. Okay, so you remember that one? All right, Dan is way up in the very, very north part of Israel. Basically, you can't go much farther north or you go into Lebanon. We actually went far enough that we could see the border of Lebanon. And kind of as you get up to the top of Israel, all right, you have Lebanon a little bit kind of on your left and your north, and you've got the Golan Heights. You probably heard that before in the news. The Golan Heights are kind of on the top right. And that's an area that Israel, of course, wants control of for protection of their country. And we can go, hopefully we'll get some time to talk a little bit through that. But there's an ancient city up there called the city of Dan. Now what makes, of course, this interesting, this was a location during the separation of the northern tribes and the southern tribes of Israel. This was kind of one of the headquarters cities, all right, during the separation of the northern and southern tribes. All right, this was a place where there was a temple, of course, that the kings, in trying to keep people from going to Jerusalem to worship, they set up a temple in a place here. They had, if you remember, the golden calf that during the, later on, that was erected up here. One thing I found really interesting about this picture is that this is the gates of the city, all right, heading into an older version of where Dan was. But what was really interesting I found as I was talking with them, often when we hear the phrase the high places, often the high places were set up right outside of the city gate. Now, what the high places actually were for, were, at least they started, were for a place for people to come and trade that were from heathen or from other cultures. Basically how it works is the moment you came within the city, any goods or anything that happened were taxed, all right? We're taxed by the city, we're taxed by the king. So sometimes there'd be a place set up outside where people basically as a favor to dignitaries, all right, as a favor to someone that was coming from another nation, that you wanted to do something nice for them so they didn't have to be taxed, they would set up this place outside. Now, I found that incredibly interesting because high places obviously became a problem with many, many different tribes of worship. And they would worship false gods and different things out at these high places. But what was interesting to me is often it sounds like culturally these high places start as a way to be kind to other nations. And it was just like giving that much room. All right, we're going to give you a place. We're going to give you a place where you can worship your gods. And eventually, as more and more room was given, those high places became a stumbling block for the nations themselves. And what an important lesson it is for us. Sometimes in trying to do something nice or to try and give room to something that's bad, it often ends up sometimes in being something bad for us. And so sometimes drawing definite lines in our life to try and make sure we stay pure is important. And this is Dan. I think I have a few other pictures of Dan. I'm not sure if there's anything else in there. Yeah, this is where, this is like the King's Gate. So they believe this is a location where like the king would sit as people came in when you talk about judgment. And you can kind of see as you come into a city, it's not like one straight gate. It kind of jogs back and forth to make these areas easier to defend. But this is where the king would have sat, and probably some of the elders off to the right-hand side here at the city of Dan. Okay, let's go to the next one, see if there's anything else in here. All right, this is interesting. This was, I think, the oldest thing that I saw. And I've got two pictures of it. This is one, and then I think the next one just gets in a little bit closer. Okay, now let me walk over here so you can see it, because this, the ruins of this, is about 4,000 years old, all right? This is from the Canaanite period, but you can kind of see, if you can make it out, a line of bricks over the top, and they're excavating this one right now. But this was one of the original entrances to the city of Dan, going back to the Canaanite time period. Now, what makes this interesting, okay, if you go with me to, let's go to Genesis 14, okay, and try and put the city of Dan into a little bit of context here. Sometimes these things are mentioned different times. The city of Dan is mentioned actually quite a few times in the Bible, more than I realized until I've kind of been looking it up since I've been to Israel. But in Genesis chapter 14 and verse 14, I want you to see why this is important. It's called, all right, this is called Abraham's Gate, is what they've named it right now. And that's from this passage. So Genesis 14 and verse 14, it says, "And when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan." All right? So this is a location we know Abraham went to. All right? Very possible even that Abraham went through this gate into this city. And we know he came to this, and this was the gate that was going and alive during Abraham's time period. I think the oldest thing that I know of that I saw, but goes back to Abraham, was 2,000 years before Christ. So 4,000 years ago that this is, that this goes back to. So it's pretty neat. Obviously, this is something, if you could see it in person, there's some dirt and different things that now have filled in kind of where the opening would be. But hey, it's 4,000 years old. It's aged pretty well, I think. So it's pretty incredible to see things like that. And then, of course, to read in the Bible that, hey, this is that location. This was the original gate to that city from 4,000 years ago. And so pretty neat to be able to date that one. Let's go to 1 Samuel 24. I'm just going to try and keep an eye on my time. But 1 Samuel chapter 24. Any questions about that one? Any questions about the city of Dan? I know if it's anything like me, it just becomes information overload after a while. But trying to put some of those pieces together. Is that how you felt when you went, Lillian? Just like by the end of the week, my brain was so tired of trying to remember everything. But it is a very, very good source of trying to put some of the Bible together. All right, so 1 Samuel 24 and verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass, when Saul was returned from following the Philistines, that it was told him, saying, Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." All right? En-Gedi is something very much that is still alive and going today. All right? So the wilderness of En-Gedi kind of surrounds what they would call a Wadi En-Gedi, all right? Or a wadi is like a valley or a low-lying place surrounded kind of by mountains. So if we go to the next picture, you'll see, I think, some pictures. Oh, that was a coney. You ever come across that Bible passage, the conies are a feeble folk? Well, when you do next time, you'll know what a coney is, all right? This is the coney. It's called a coney. Church is even asking what it is. All right, so this is up at the very top of En-Gedi. These are some of the men that I went with. But there is a big collapsed cave at the very top of En-Gedi. And so a lot of people wonder when you read some of these passages about David and all his men hiding in a cave. This cave, before it collapsed, would have been incredibly large and a fantastic place to hide a lot of people. So a lot of people wonder if right at the top here of En-Gedi, or of this hike that we went on, would have been possibly where David hid with his men. But we know that in the wilderness surrounding En-Gedi, of course, is where David hid from Saul when Saul was trying to find him. Let's go to the next one. Now, this is also En-Gedi, okay? So basically what's happening here, and you're only seeing one side of the half, you have on your left, or my left side, your left side, you have where the water from En-Gedi is coming. Okay, so you have a fertile area for maybe 20 feet wide, all right, is all that's green. And on the right side, you've got rocks, and on the left side, you have rocks. And it's about that steep for 80 to 100 feet, okay? No one's climbing up it, no one's climbing down it. And the reason I'm sharing that with you is because when you read those passages in the Bible where you read like David talking with Saul, okay, and having a conversation with Saul, like, Saul, hey, I could have taken your life and I didn't take your life. If one of them's on one side of one of these things and the other one's on the other side, you can have a great old conversation. No one's a threat to anybody because it would take you, several hours to get down one side and up the other. So it really helps paint the picture of some of these Bible stories and what would have happened. You can see, a couple of the men that I was with down kind of walking on the bottom of the wadi. They call them wadis, kind of these valley areas. Because Israel in some areas is just a combination of valleys and mountains and a very up and down area. But this is En-Gedi, and so gives you a little bit. This is down, of course, towards the Dead Sea. So this is, if you're looking towards where that cave was, that I showed you a picture of with the 3 men in, that is right up in the very top of where that waterfall is. So where you're walking in, you get this idea of how green it can be just around the water, but then you get away from the water and it's quite desert. And this is all, this is right down in the south of Israel, right? Down in the south, kind of close to the Dead Sea, all right? So En-Gedi would be a 10-15 minute drive from the Dead Sea is basically where you are, quite close. Let's go to the next one. Oh, this was our trip on the Sea of Galilee, all right? So this was interesting because they found on the bottom of the Sea of Galilee remnants of a ship from Jesus' time, okay? And so what this group did that we were with this day, and they had just opened up, from what I understand, here within the last year, trying to get ready for tourists to come back, but they had reconstructed those boats to scale of the boats that were fishing boats during Jesus' time. So they took us out on the Sea of Galilee. Actually, the day we went out, the wind was up a little bit. And you do realize you put 12, 13 men and some water inside a boat about this size, and the waves start looking up. If you can remember that story from Jesus Christ, you can see how you would get scared pretty quick. Now, you can't quite see in this picture to the other side, and the boats that we had were powered with electric motors, which would be a lot better than rowing, okay? But you can definitely get the feel as to how you could put one of those boats down and definitely get the disciples pretty nervous when they were crossing if the waves came up. See if we've got any other pictures. I think I've got a few pictures here of the Sea of Galilee. So this is a narrow spot in the Sea of Galilee, all right? So you're able to look. This was in Magdala, which I'll show you in a minute, but this is where our hotel was for 3 nights. And you can kind of see, and this is, further up again in the northern part of Israel. but just gives you a beautiful perspective on what the Sea of Galilee looked like. So I know for me, when I heard sea, I imagined like Lake Ontario, okay? But it's a lot more like what you'd see the Sea of Galilee, like a northern lake in Ontario. It's quite a bit smaller. So that shows you another perspective what the Sea of Galilee is like. So you can see most of the time, almost all the time I saw the Sea of Galilee, you can see from one side to the other. All right, it's not like an expanse of water. But when it's being powered by, paddles and rowboats, it is a different perspective. Where you're seeing, if you're interested, where you're seeing the Sea of Galilee from right now, that's from Capernaum. All right, so Capernaum is right there on the Sea of Galilee, and I took that picture when I was basically standing in Capernaum and took that picture. So, no, Capernaum is where I'm standing. And Capernaum would be kind of on the north, hold on, I'm getting my bearings. All right, would be on the northern side of the Sea of Galilee, but a little bit on the north, the northwest side. It's kind of in that corner. Yeah, there's another coast. So you're basically looking south. So when you're trying to get the geography of Israel, you basically, the tributaries of the Jordan River start up by where Dan is. All right, one of them is the Dan River. And I think there's three main, basically small brooks. Well, small brooks is not really fair. They're not really wide across, but they do seem to carry a lot of water from what I saw when I was there. Three that come together and form the Jordan River. All right? The Jordan River runs into the Sea of Galilee, and then it narrows again way towards the bottom of that water that you can see across. I think it's about 13 miles long where it widens out, okay? And then it narrows again into the Jordan River, and the Jordan River carries that water all the way down to the Dead Sea, all right? And then at the Dead Sea, nothing gets out. And that's why the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea and has so many mineral deposits and salt and things like that it's so well known for. But you have your geography of the country that basically all the way down is bordered by the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Now, almost all, I want to say all, but I don't want to be incorrect, but almost everywhere on the other side of the Jordan, on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, that's no longer Israeli territory. All right, once you get over past on the other side, you're in Jordan. All right, so Jordan is on that far east side of the Sea of Galilee. So it'll help maybe if you take a look at, if you haven't done before, on a map of Israel, and that'll help get that in. But this is the Sea of Galilee. Of course, a lot of different things happened around. Every time you hear in the Bible of someone crossing the Sea of Galilee or the Sea of Tiberias, this is the one. Denise?
It looks like a small sea, but is it deep?
You know what? I don't know that. I didn't ask. My memory while we were out there is that it was, but I don't remember, right? So, but this is the place, like during Christ's time period, this would have been something. This was basically the only freshwater lake of any kind in Israel. Okay, and that really changes. Water in Israel is so much the basis of their survival, having a water source. Because some areas are hotter, because water is not plentiful, in so many areas, that being close to some of a water source like this. So your main fishing at Jesus' time would almost all be being done in the Sea of Galilee, because there's really no other lakes that I know of to speak of at all in the entire country, in that entire region. But yeah, I don't know specifically how deep it is. Let's go ahead and go to the next picture. This is the Garden Tomb. And this is, of course, the location where they believe Jesus Christ was buried. It's just a 2-minute, not even a 2-minute walk, maybe a 1-minute walk from where they believe Golgotha was, the Hill of the Skull. And so you can actually, one of the things was very fortunate about our trip is usually sites like this would be, tourism is a big thing in Israel, and a lot of people that go to visit these sites. So usually there's, it can be 100 people in this little garden that want to be there. But the day we were there, I think there was maybe 5 other people that were in there, and then just our group. So that was really nice. We were really able to take our time in places like this. And, it's a sobering place. I mean, they don't know with 100% certainty where it was. There's this and there's one other. But a lot of people very firmly believe, based on evidence, that Jesus Christ was buried here and rose from the dead here. So that's a pretty incredible moment to kind of look at that and consider that. But, the great thing about both the locations is both the tombs are empty. So, that's a wonderful thing. And it's pretty neat to be able to be there. Let's go ahead and go to the next picture. Okay, this one might be a little bit challenging to see. But remember I was talking about like these wadis is what they call them. These valleys where water runs through and kind of desolate areas. And you can't hardly see it, okay? But there are paths that go up these locations. All right, and the reason I'm sharing this with you, because it'll put a little bit in perspective of the story of the Good Samaritan. And I won't go to the text for sake of time tonight, but the story of the Good Samaritan says that he went on a road from Jerusalem to Jericho, okay? And I'm going to show you one of the picture here in just a minute, but that road actually goes right through this wadi, all right, goes right through this location. Can we go ahead and go to that next picture? You'll be able to see it. All right, so this was kind of a monastery that was built down on this Jericho road, and the path you can see for this Jericho road is right there on the bottom. I would just walk over and show you, okay? So this is all part here of this Jericho road, is right down here, okay? And it just kind of snakes its way along. You can see it at the top there as well. Snakes its way along through that canyon. Now, when the Bible says that someone traveling on that road fell among thieves, even today, it's a dangerous place to travel. Our guide told us that if he walked that road, he would not do so without a gun, all right? It's just a place where people can sneak up on you very easily. It's a place that's just not safe because you never know kind of what's around the corner. And it's a place where you're just in a very bad situation if someone would come along there. That monastery, I'm trying to remember exactly. I think there have been like monks or things that have been there since, my memory is like 500 or 600 AD that have stayed down there in that valley. But it's a pretty incredible hike to kind of walk down into that and then back up again. And so it was kind of neat there through that section. But that would have been that Jericho road. All right, let's keep going. See what else we can get through here. All right, this is one of the pictures I took while I was in Jerusalem. So this gate is the gate when you come over the Mount of Olives. Okay, you come over the Mount of Olives, down through the valley of Jehoshaphat, if my memory serves me right, all right, down through that valley also called the Kidron Valley, all right, where Jesus Christ would have come through that eastern gate on Palm Sunday. Now, it's interesting now, I mean, it's all bricked up, it's all closed in because of the conflict. Everything that is significant in many ways to the Jews, because, of course, there's a prophecy that talks about the Messiah coming through that eastern gate. That's why when Jesus Christ came through on Palm Sunday, it was so significant. And people cried, Hosanna, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. The Muslims really don't like the idea of anything about Jesus Christ or the Messiah being fulfilled. So they have bricked that off. They put a graveyard on the other side of it, okay? Because they believe if a Messiah was ever to walk through there, all right, that he'd have to walk over unholy ground. So in many ways, they're trying to do everything they can. There's a mosque that's down there built low. And this is just, I found this very interesting because, okay, in order to get to the level of Jesus Christ Day, you're always going down. All right, you're always digging down. Almost everything is like 6 feet lower than ground level today because things are built on top of each other, the natural sediments and stuff from the world. All right, but if you want to go down into there, we couldn't go in there because it is a mosque there now. But very interesting to see. I think that gate was bricked up sometime around like 400 or 500 AD. And then through the Crusades, it was opened back up again. And then the Muslims closed it back up again. But you can feel a little bit when you're on the Temple Mount. All right, the Temple Mount that it's called, of course, is under Palestinian control right now. All right, the Jews, of course, want to have a temple built there again. That's when you see pictures of the Jews, like at the Wailing Wall, that's basically the outside perimeter, not of actually even the temple itself, but just the outside perimeter of basically the courtyard to the temple, but that's as close as they can get to the location of the temple. So they will stand out there praying and weeping and crying and desiring to get to what they believe to be, of course, the presence of God. And what an incredible reminder to be thankful for, of course, to know that the Messiah has come, that our sins are forgiven, but that is something that's very significant to them. We'll go ahead and keep moving through these. These are all pictures of Jerusalem. That is the Temple Mount up there. And I didn't feel unsafe at all when I was in Israel at any moment. You do find sometimes you can sense the racial tension between people groups for sure. Like even Old Jerusalem itself is broken up into 4 quarters, all right? You have 4 different divisions just for the immediate city. You have the Muslim quarter, the Armenian quarter, the Christian quarter, and the Jewish quarter, all right? As a tourist, you can go anywhere, and I'm not sure if, a Jew can go everywhere, but you can feel the racial tension a little bit between people groups. And so you can sense this while you're up there. Let's go ahead and go to the next picture. So this is Jerusalem. This is underneath Jerusalem. Now, as you read through the Bible, one of the things that's really interesting about Jerusalem, and maybe we'll go back and look at one verse. Okay, Jerusalem became such a significant city even before the Israelites ever came to that region. Okay, because of the fact that Jerusalem is a mountain, but it is a mountain which inside of it has a spring. Okay, so basically geographically, you're almost higher than everybody around you, but you have a consistent water source inside the mountain. All right, so when you hear the term the Gehan Spring in the Bible, the Gehan Spring is a spring that is inside basically the core of the mountain of Jerusalem. And the Gehan Spring starts, all right, and it trickles down, all right, through the mountain for a portion, down into the pool of Siloam, all right? And that is often where you can see as you look, that's often where the Jewish people go to get their water. And sometimes at certain feasts, they take that water and take it up to the temple. But it all came from this spring that, I mean, it's amazing how much water is coming naturally out of the inner core of a mountain. But it's what made Jerusalem an incredible place to be able to protect and to, even withstand a siege. Because a lot of countries, all right, a lot of places, all you gotta do is close up the gates, don't let anybody in or out, and people are gonna need water really soon. But Jerusalem had this natural source of water that really kept it in a good place of protection. So there's some underwater tunnels that have basically been built. This is underneath the city of Jerusalem that you can walk through. I think this one of them is Hezekiah's. You remember that story where Hezekiah was, trying to defend the city. But you can walk for like 500 meters underground through some of these water channels. And it's pretty incredible to see some of these, of course, dating back, hundreds and thousands of years that were still in existence, haven't been impacted as much as some of the surface things as far as being buried. But this is one of those tunnels underneath the city of Jerusalem. And I will tell you, they're narrow, okay? For me, like I had to, be sideways, going through. Wasn't exactly comfortable, but it was neat to see kind of where the Gehan Spring kind of goes and then basically gives a water source for the city of Jerusalem. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide and we'll take a look at this. Oh, this was, interesting. Our guide told us it was like one of he hardly ever gets a look inside of the Dome of the Rock, okay, which is a Muslim mosque on top of the temple. Now, why is this significant, okay? On the top of this mountain is where the Jewish people believe, and there's good evidence for that from everything I can understand, it's accurate, where they believe that Isaac, all right, was sacrificed, all right, was put on the altar. That's why this is a significant place for them. Later on, it seems through Muslim conflict that it was something that the Muslims and Christians and Jewish people have kind of battled over the years for. And, different things of tradition have been placed on it as significant to many different people. And that's why there's so much conflict over this location. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so this is, if you can see right in the center, that's that eastern gate that's bricked up. Right underneath of it, you can see that graveyard that is there. But this is looking at it from where the Garden of Gethsemane is. Okay, so this is when we were in the Garden of Gethsemane. You can see at the top there, the walls of the old city of Jerusalem. Right? That is where Jerusalem, the perimeter of it, what they call the old city. Okay, so when we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's just interesting to think and get that perspective, because the temple of Jesus Christ's time, Herod's temple, would have sat right inside those walls. So when Jesus Christ is in the Garden of Gethsemane praying, Father, not my will, but thine be done, he has a clear view right up to where the walls are. He has a clear view to where that temple is. It's not a great distance from the location, but he has a clear view of the city. And there's different times where Jesus Christ weeps over the city of Jerusalem, all right? And this is the perspective that he would have had coming down from the Mount of Olives and then through there, that eastern gate that he would have gone through on Palm Sunday. Let's go ahead and keep going. I'm going to have to fly through these if I can to get through these pictures. I'll get through what I can. This is that western wall that, of course, you see on the right side. That is the passageway that you need to take if you want to go into the Temple Mount. And you have to go past, sometimes some soldiers and things there. But we were able to go up to the western wall. We were able to pray up there, which was kind of neat, and to take a few minutes there. And so that is, those are the walls that are there, or the foundation walls that are there, are from Herod's temple, which would have been from the time of Christ, right? So it's a pretty significant location. It's not the temple wall itself, but it's basically the courtyard of the Gentiles, all right, that holds basically that retaining wall for inside the temple. So, but it's a big, significant location because that's the closest the Jewish people can get right now to where the temple stood. All right, let's keep going. This is Magdala, all right? This is interesting. Magdala, of course, Mary Magdalene. This is where she would have been from. Neat thing about this is the remains of a synagogue from the first century. All right, so the Bible tells us that Jesus Christ taught in all the synagogues of Galilee. All right, so this would have been one of the synagogues that Christ would have taught in. But the Bible talks about Jesus Christ. I don't have time to go to the passage tonight, but that he came to the coast of Magdala. He dealt with the Pharisees and the Sadducees at this location. They were always being religious and giving him a hard time. And this is one of the places that he dealt with and corrected those Pharisees. They've built basically over the last few years a hotel right over it. That's the hotel, one of them that we stayed at. I'm going to go to just a few more pictures. We'll get through these. We'll just flip through them. This is, and this is going to be hard to see, but this is from the top of Mount Gerizim. So if you look, and I'll just walk and point it to you right here, all right, that little red building, going back a ways you won't be able to see it. But that is where Jacob's well was, okay? There's been a church that's been built over Jacob's well. So when you go to that passage where Jesus Christ must needs go through Samaria, all right, and he goes and he spends time with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, that was the location. Where we're standing is Mount Gerizim, when the Samaritan woman said, you say we should worship at Jerusalem, our fathers say to worship at this mountain. All right, that was the mountain that we were standing on, all right? And even today, those Samaritan people still have a system where they do sacrifices on that mountain. They still stayed separated from Judaism, all right, from the Orthodox Jews, and so they still have kind of their own religion where they still do animal sacrifices and different things, a little bit strange because it's just kind of a blend of stuff they've taken from Judaism and stuff they've taken from idolatry. All right, let's keep flipping. We'll go through this. This is the same picture, just kind of zoomed out. I did want to show you a little bit of the topography of some of these locations. You can see kind of the mountains off there in the distance. Oh, this is part of Shiloh. This is where the tabernacle stood. These are some of these last pictures. The tabernacle would have been just off to the right. Can we go to the next one? Hopefully that'll give. Yeah, so this is neat. And this was one of my favorite sites, and really the pictures don't do it justice. But here, kind of part, all right, right off to the right side, would have been some of where the tabernacle stood, and just right in this location. But what's neat is as you look up and look around, okay, you have all of these mountains kind of on all sides, places where all the tribes of Israel could have looked and gathered around and looked down in on what was going on at the temple. one thing that I found really interesting about the topography of being there as well is that the direction that the temple stood was a clear shot from the east to the west. Now what they explained to us is really interesting about that is everyone during this time period, part of their pagan worship, worshiped the sun. Okay? Everyone worshiped the sun. It was, and you see that even as you look back in history. But what was interesting about Jewish culture is every time the high priest did his work, where the entrance of the temple was, where the entrance to the Holy of Holies was, every time he did his work, he turned his back to the sun. And I just found that interesting. And the topography of how that tabernacle laid, where the sun would come, would be right at his back every time. It's almost as if Israel is saying, we're going to do absolutely opposite of what the rest of the world is doing. We're just going to be totally and absolutely different. And everything that was happening, all of those tribes are on hills like that. And you just kind of imagine them all scattered, like, see across there for nearly 400 years that the tabernacle stood there. And it was just an incredible place to kind of stand and just look around and imagine what that would have been like for the nation of Israel as they stayed there during Shiloh. Of course, this would have been the same location where Hannah would have prayed for a son and said, God, if you give me a child, I'll give him back to you. And this would have been that location that she prayed. Oh, so this is where it gives you a little bit more of a perspective. So you can see that little bit of a building structure down here. Okay? They put that up right over where they believed to be the tabernacle. And one of the reasons, beyond just the fact that that piece of ground fits the measurements that the tabernacle was, one thing that they found that's really interesting, kind of all around that location, is because of how things worked with the tabernacle, my understanding of what was explained to me is that pottery in the temple could only be used once, all right, could only be used one time. After that, it was unclean. So when you go to the soil that surrounds this tabernacle location, there is pottery, broken pottery pieces everywhere. Everywhere. I mean, I reached down and in about 10 seconds, I brought about 10 pieces back home. All right, they're just everywhere because they would have been, there would have been a lot of people there and all the pottery and things would have been broken for temple worship. So it really made an interesting location for me as I looked at that one. All right, before we close out, any questions? Hopefully gave you something to think about, something to chew on tonight.
So basically it's bleak.
What's that?
The landscape is bleak.
Yeah, it varies from one location to another. Like up in this region, you're in Samaria. Galilee is even a little bit further up than that. And a lot of it, like we went there in a rainy time. Okay? A lot of the green that you're even seeing there right now, my understanding, is during their warmer months. That's not even there. And you see scripturally, of course, there's parts where the land was cursed. There was a time where this was land that flowed with milk and honey, right? There was a time where this was much more fertile, all right? But some of the curses that God, pronounced on Israel, if you disobey me, these are some of the things that you're going to suffer. Also, the Bible says that the desert will blossom as a rose, and it's interesting to see, as Israel is getting possession of some of this country back, how fertile they're able to make certain regions. Like when we were way up in Dan, I mean, you see fig trees, you see all these different things, and then as soon as you hit the Lebanon border, all right, on the other side, they're growing tobacco and opium. I mean, it's just like, and the starkness of the change from one region to another is incredible. But yeah, it's a pretty barren landscape, a lot of it. Yes?
Do you see where the children of Israel marched around the city of Jericho 7 times?
We saw Jericho from a distance. We didn't go right down into Jericho. Jericho right now is a Palestinian city. So, some cities like Bethlehem is another Palestinian city right now, so we didn't go into Bethlehem. So for the most part, like we're able to go through the West Bank, no problem. But for the most part, they didn't take us like into the core of cities that were, Arab controlled, so. Yes?
Do you have a lot of figs?
Do I have a lot of figs?
No, I said, did you have a lot of figs when you were there?
No, I didn't eat a lot of figs, actually. I ate quite a bit of dates. Those dates were really good. Figs? I don't know if I had one. I've had fig Newtons. They're good. Anybody else questions? Something made you think? It's a lot of information. If you ever get the chance to go to Israel, if you can ever carve out the money and go, I would say this. I would say for me, it's equivalent to like a year of Bible college in a week. There's just so much. For me, as a person that studied the Bible for a large portion of my life, it was just like I have all the puzzle pieces, but then seeing Israel, it just really helps fit some things together. And it's hard, and maybe that's the way my brain works, but I've heard the same thing from many others. Once you get a layout of the geography, you can really start putting together where all these locations and things happened, and it's very, very helpful. All right, let's pray, and we'll be dismissed tonight. God, thank you that we could just take some time tonight to look at this place which has such a unique perspective in the world. And Lord, we know that you're not done with Jerusalem. We know one day as we look at the book of Revelation that one day you're going to make all things new, and that there'll be a new Jerusalem, and that there'll be a place there where still people will gather from the world to come and worship you during the millennial reign. And Lord, we look forward to that with anticipation. We're excited about all that you're doing in this world. We do pray tonight for Israel, for Jerusalem, for peace in that country, in that region. And Lord, we do ask tonight that you would help us, Lord, to love you and to get to know your word better. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, thank you for your attention tonight. You are dismissed. Well, thanks so much for joining us for our service today. It's my prayer and hope that it's been a blessing and an encouragement to your life. I want to share something with you that I hope will be a help to you, specifically if maybe you have some questions about where you're at spiritually with God. And maybe you're not sure you've got forgiveness from Him. Maybe you're not sure whenever life comes to an end where you'll spend eternity, with God in heaven or separated from Him. We've set up a website that I hope will answer those questions for you. If you go to steelcitychurch.ca/answers, there's some great simple videos that'll walk you through some necessary steps to make sure you understand what God expects of you. I want to thank you again for joining us for our service. And wherever you're at spiritually, I trust you've been encouraged and helped today. God bless you.